I'm not the speaker. I'm introduce. It's a delight to see you all here. Fantastic turnout, and I think you'll be richly rewarded for being here this afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce the Rameys. And as I was just saying, that this is the 4th annual Martin Luther King Week event schedule. Started in 2011, which actually, by the way, is the same year that Rameys came to Virginia Tech, as I recall, in February of 2011. So 4 years ago, maybe 4 on 4 in this case. It's terrific to have them here with us. This talk this afternoon is sponsored by a number of individuals, including what we just heard from the Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior Seminar Series, but also the Biological Sciences Committee on Diversity. I also chair the Diversity Committee in Psychology, by the way, although it's really the Department of Psychology that's sponsoring this, as well as the Diversity Committee. But also the College of Science, the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, Seminar Series, the Virginia Tech Life Science Seminar Series. So there's several different people behind you here. I certainly thank all of them. Just a few words about the Rameys. I was going to have some PowerPoints ready, but that would have taken me most of the hour to go through. Collectively, they have 400, 500 different publications, presentations, books, chapters, 800 radio shows, and 9,000 TV series. They've really been extremely productive over the years. Whenever you hear the Rameys, you think of the Rameys, and there's actually 2 of them, Sharon and Craig. And of course, they've been together for a number of years now, having been at Georgetown just before coming here. But prior to that, at Alabama, and prior to that, UNC in Chapel Hill. I think that's where I first met you folks, was in 1987, 87 or 88, down in Chapel Hill. But they've been around to many different places. Sharon is a graduate of the University of Washington. And just this, 2 years ago now, received a prestigious award from the University of Washington, kind of an all-time personal award. And Craig just received an award from Fordham. He's from West Virginia University on early education. They've published just some seminal pieces on early education, early experience, and how education experience might be the links to the future. And the title of their talk is subtitled "Can the Circle," or not can, but will the circle be unbroken? And I understand from Google, at least, that sometimes that is now referred to as "Can the Circle be unbroken?" We'll be talking with us this afternoon about education and experiences and how those might signal better outcomes for the youth that we deal with. And this is so appropriate for Martin Luther King Day to have you all here. And just this morning, I got a thing, by the way, from Bill and Linda Gates, not personally, mind you, but just announcing our big bet for the future. And for the Gates, 15 years ago, they indicate that health and education could dramatically reduce inequity across the world. They're doubling their bet on that in the next 20 years or so. And here we have 2 people today to tell us how that's going to be done. Sharon and Craig Ramey. Sharon first, I believe.
Thank you. Gracious, warm introduction.
We are very honored and excited to be here. We can't possibly tell you all the things we wanted to tell you. We have spent weeks cutting back to try to squeeze it into an hour. So I hope we will do it. But at the very end, first of all of the PowerPoint will be available. And any of you who want references or follow-up, contact us. And we'll say at the very beginning, in case at the end you forget to do that. And in 1963, twice I got to meet Martin Luther King in person. And I was in high school, and he was working with our rabbi, and we were all out in the streets picketing for fair employment at the bank. And then Martin Luther King, Dr. King, came to our temple and gave sermons and talked about love and compassion and healing. And although the time I spent with him, once I was in a room with maybe 6 people for maybe an hour, you know how sometimes small things can just stay with you your whole life. And he was one of those kinds of people.
And he was already Martin Luther King then. You know, he was already a major force in our country. inspiration, which rarely gets studied scientifically, by the way, inspiration should not be underestimated as to what it can bring forth.
In people. And so today we're going to talk about investments in human capital to change the human brain and support the human spirit rather than break it. And we've had a lot of broken spirits, lives, and tragedies. We have a country
Committed to wonderful ideals and far from realizing them. So today we hope we can have the data help inspire you in all of your many different fields. So again, it's a great opportunity. Our basic
premises for the talk are that poverty, it's not poverty, it's living in poverty, impacts individuals' biology. Wherever we live impacts our biology, but poverty especially confers many challenges and sometimes some opportunities to benefit. So the effects of poverty aren't all bad, but poverty is inexcusable. Biology, in turn, affects how you experience things. So two people who've had different backgrounds and come with different biologies to the same room might hear and take away different things based on biology and where you are in your development. If you're a 3-year-old attending this talk, or a 23-year-old, or actually Tom asked if both of us needed chairs to sit to deliver. I said no, we could still stand. And health. And if any of you haven't seen the amazing movie, The Theory of Everything, to talk about health and how the mind can be preserved in spite of it, the life of Stephen Hawking. Wow, go see it, to see how the brain can be preserved despite amazing impairment of health. Health and experiences of parents can actually change the life course of future generations in ways that are non-genetically transmitted. We'll talk about that today. And that the intergenerational patterns, the correlations we detect, generation after generation, as well as educational attainment, families highly achieving, families not able to achieve, are predictable, but we will show you today that that cycle prediction can be broken. Will depends on a lot more than knowledge. So the conceptualization, poverty, for us, we define it in our research, it has to have two features. Not only low income or low resources available, but it also means limited or insufficient experiences to support life and brain development, social development, and so forth. So it's both. We must remember the vast majority of people who live in poverty turn out well and include some amazingly talented people. And very often they had factors promoting and protecting them from the economic impairment so that their experiences were not impaired to the same degree as other people who grow up in economic poverty. Poverty, usually we use a simple marker. Are you below the federal poverty level, which right now is $23,850 for a family of 4. And there's a lot of variation within that. And in our country, race, especially being Black and African American, will predict in a very powerful way, and this is what we hope will be broken, income and rates of poverty, and children of all races and ethnicities are most likely to grow up in poverty. That's because there are often more children than adults in certain subgroups, and that will foreshadow future health disparities. This is just showing median income over the last 23 years in our country. Hasn't gotten much better. The very bottom line.
Sorry, I'm going to give you a mic.
Okay. Am I not speaking loud enough?
I think the people in the back can't hear
Okay, I can definitely raise this. Does that help a little? Oh, absolutely, not a problem. Sorry. The last 23 years, things haven't gotten too much better. And the disparity in median family income for blacks compared to whites has not improved. Blacks earn about 59% of that of whites. Poverty rates among children are alarming for all children. They're especially alarming because they're increasing for all children in the U.S. And you can see, if you look over here on the right, 2012, nearly 40% of the children who are black, and this is black non-Hispanic, grow up in poverty compared to the national rate, the third bar over, of 18.4%. And for white non-Hispanics, it's even lower, but not shown. You can also see growing up in a single parent household increases drastically the rate of poverty. But these are alarming rates for a country as rich and powerful as ours. Health, well, it's a lot of things. Right after World War II, World Health Organization said health isn't just your physical well-being. It's also your social and your mental. There is no consensus. Believe it or not, no one exactly agrees. We can't measure it. We don't have a single number. We don't even have an agreed upon composite. But everyone does agree it's more than the absence of things going wrong. And there's a new vision. I think a lot of you who are in biology or genetics know about the idea that we would individually tailor treatments, that when we each carry around our individual genetic code, we will better be able to reach accurate diagnosis, timely treatments, and individualize them. Well, in any subgroups of people, we have lots of differences. Blacks and white differ in how much nicotine they get from smoking the same number of cigarettes. Wound healing is different. Bacterial substrates in parts of the body are different. These are biological differences that inherently have no good or bad meaning. It depends on how you interact with the rest of the stuff. So we have different color eyes and different color hair. One isn't better than the other. So there are a lot of biological differences that are just natural variation. If we get to precision medicine, I worry about health disparities. Are they going to be worse? If to get precision medicine that's matched to your own genome, are you going to have to be smart and highly educated and rich and know how to hold your own when you're dealing with someone in the healthcare world that is being difficult and not responsive? And will that drive the disparities so that the least educated and the most economically impoverished benefit last? When we have brand new breakthroughs, the rich and advantaged usually get them first. We make sure they're working, and then 10, 20, 30 years later, we just worry about whether they're equitable. We're smart enough to know that we might face a lot of inequities when we get to personalized medicine, and we need to think ahead right now. Almost everything you can think of, blacks have more of all of these diseases and conditions. It's a bleak picture looked at collectively. We're not going to dwell on that. We want to move on to how do we overcome. So today we picked 3 studies that we've had the honor of being part of from the beginning, but each of them has involved literally scores of colleagues at multiple other universities. So it's not our work alone. And one study, the first, the Auditorium project, we will show you findings, including findings from 2014, very recent ones published in Science, that early education and health interventions can disrupt the highly predictable pattern across generations that the children will not graduate high school, that they won't be healthy, that their intelligence when tested on standardized tests will be lower than the national average. We will show you data that this can be changed. It's a study been running for 42 years. And we'll be having the children come here to Virginia Tech in the next year or two. not as students, because they're past that age. Their kids are ready to come, but come here for more testing. Number two, so the Abecedarian children were all born healthy. The way we say, oh, your baby's healthy to a mom and a dad, they look to be healthy. Now, the next group of children, we then said, well, would this work for children who are not healthy, like really tiny, premature, low birth weight babies who face survival at first, and then lots of potential dysfunctioning, mainly of their brain? Can the same intervention change their life? And the answer is yes, and we'll show you those data from 8 different cities. And then the third, sounds at first like it's way far away, but it isn't, because the third project began with the huge disparities between blacks and whites in prematurity and low birth weight, which confer that negative sequelae. Is it possible that not only during pregnancy, but prior to conception, there are life experiences and biological changes in the parents that then alter the lives and development of the children above and beyond what they inherit genetically? And we have data on that. That project's been running since 2002. We have new findings under review, which my colleagues have given me permission to share with you in general, and you'll get to hear a little bit more.
To be introduced by Tom Olendick in such a gracious and profound way is an honor that I will treasure forever. Tom is one of the really outstanding contributors on Virginia Tech campus, and so thank you so much. In 1968, a monograph appeared in the Harvard Education Review, and it began with the following sentence. It said, compensatory education has been tried, and apparently it has failed. And it went on to argue that it had failed because the fool's errand of social liberals had been played out, and because kids had been given a summer program prior to going to first grade and were shown to not differ from kids who had not had that program, all of whom were, the vast majority of whom were African American children, it was judged that therefore the program hadn't worked, and that the result was clearly attributable to the genetic inferiority of the participants and the fool's errand of anyone trying to make a substantial change. Many of us thought that the science wasn't very strong, and we thought the conclusions were overblown, and that one thing that could be done was to try to bring a more powerful intervention, if you will, to bear, with the realization that people who are born into poverty, particularly intergenerationally, face so many different compromises on their development that it seemed to us highly unlikely that one could, in a matter of 3 months, at roughly 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, take away all of those insults that had been heaped upon people for as many as 400 years. I was present at the beginning of the civil rights movement. I believe deeply that our country cannot succeed in the long term if we do not offer hope and practical support to all of our citizens. We were able to get the resources to launch something that we called the Abecedarian Project. By the way, Abecedarian means one who learns the fundamentals of something, such as one who learns the alphabet. And what we decided to do was to determine if we did everything that we knew was important, whether we could take the most disadvantaged group of children we could find anywhere and provide for them the best education that we could provide and the best health care and the best family supports, beginning essentially at birth, and then to do it in an intensive way over what turns out to be an 8-year period, to find out whether we could prevent the kind of intellectual and social consequences that all too frequently and to this day occur to poor people, and particularly to poor minority individuals in a disproportionate way, as Sharon has argued, whether we could at the same time promote a kind of positivity with respect to cognitive development and social contribution, and what would the relationship be between providing these kinds of services early in life and the subsequent developmental course. I was 24 when I began to write the proposal for this, and luckily no one told us we couldn't do it. This is the research design that we began with. And here, all throughout, red will indicate a treatment condition, yellow will indicate a non-treatment condition, with certain exceptions, which I'll mention in a moment, and R indicates random assignment to different treatment conditions. So we decided to begin at birth. We actually began in the last trimester of pregnancy, identifying individuals using a 13-item high-risk screening index, and we screened all pregnant women in the county that we were going to do the project in. We then randomly assigned at birth the children who were born biologically healthy, and we provided a preschool program that I'll describe very briefly in just a moment, until the children went to kindergarten, at which point we randomly divided each of those groups and provided for one half of each group an intensive kindergarten, first and second grade program and a summer program between those school years that worked with the classroom teacher, worked with the families, and had a focus on reading and math skills. And then at the age of 8, we stopped the intervention, and we've been now following these children with follow-ups at ages 8, 12, 15, 21, 30, and 35 years of age. And we are going to be bringing these individuals to Virginia Tech at age 42 to participate in some fMRI scans to try to better understand how their brains have developed over the years. We have almost all of the children who ever participated. At age 30, we had 98% of all the ones still living. And I think we know why that is. It's because anyone who participated in this study got more resources than they would have gotten had they not participated. So this really is a comparison of different treatment intensities, not if we do everything for one group and nothing for the other, will it make a difference. So we provided nutritional supplements throughout early childhood. We provided family support social services to both groups, working to allow them as best we could to attain the goals that they set for their family: better housing, cutting through red tape, getting into any program they were eligible for. We also provided free, or if they had insurance, we would bill for pediatric services delivered on the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended schedule. Why do we do that? Well, in this country in 1971, when our pilot work began, you were guaranteed in principle, although not in reality, that those services were ones that you could get if you were poor. We wanted to be sure that all the services that were in principle guaranteed were in fact delivered, so that those would not become differentiating factors if group differences were to emerge. What was different is that we created an educational program, building a new school, that began when the children were 6 weeks of age. The children attended it 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, from 6 weeks of age until they went to public school kindergarten. We recruited teachers, we trained the teachers, we had weekly in-service training, we documented the curriculum delivered every day to every child, and there are many nuances of this that are important scientifically, but in this meeting, time doesn't allow that level of detail to be discussed. The curriculum was designed to be a broad and supportive one, not just in the area of cognition, but in social skills, self-esteem, language. It was individualized to each child each day in a fairly complicated set of algorithms that we kept track of on our primitive computers back in those days. This may be the most intensely studied group of children that I know of. We recorded into our computers roughly 10,000 pieces of information per child and family per year, and it ranged from the various bacteria and mycoplasma in their respiratory systems to whether they were affiliated with a church or participated in sports as a family and many other things. We're going to concentrate today on breaking the cycle that this country is dedicated to in principle and that we still must work at every day to make a reality. We had teams of people who did assessments of the children, not knowing what conditions the children had been assigned to. The reason for doing it as a randomized controlled trial is so you can start off with two groups that within the logic of statistics are equivalent to begin with. These are simply summaries of the children's scores on cognitive assessments from 6 months of age to 48 months of age, and this is showing the percentage of children who remain within normal limits as determined by these assessments, which means that you have an IQ score of 85 or above, or to say it another way, that you are above the 15th percentile, roughly. And what you see is that these two groups started off, as a matter of fact, back here you'll see it in the next slide, they were exactly even at 3 months of age. The treatment group remains within normal limits, and over time, only about 45% of the kids in the control group. Remember, that's even though those children are getting nutritional supplements, health care, and their families are getting social services. So it's what the education is doing on top of that is important. This is a little complicated. What we've done is to simply create z-scores by putting all of the scores together at a given point in time, normalizing that distribution, and then breaking them out by whether you were in the treated condition or the control condition, plotting the mean z-score through time, and what you see is that above each point or below it, we've put the metric of the assessment, which has a national average of 100. We've put the actual arithmetic average for each of those points. And what you see is that during the first year, the two groups are remarkably similar. But beginning in the second year, the groups really begin to diverge. They diverge at the level that has been reported on average that separates African Americans and Caucasians in this country. When we were recruiting this sample, we did not have race as a criterion. We had 13 other factors like maternal education, IQ, family income, and so on. We did this study in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and it turned out that 98% of the eligible families were African American. 2% were Caucasian. That certainly did not mean that 98% of all of African Americans in Chapel Hill were at risk, but it said risk was disproportionately represented among the African American population and virtually absent in the Caucasian population. So what you see across the bottom here is a frequently used metric called an effect size, where an effect size is simply the difference of the mean of one group, treatment group, minus the mean of the control group, and then divided by a measure of the standard deviation of the control group. In general, in life sciences, effect sizes of bigger than about 0.25 are regarded as ones that you would pay attention to from a policy point of view. Effect sizes that size, if you report something that has to do with cancer or whatever, make it usually into JAMA or some other major medical publication. What I want to draw your attention to is the effect sizes here and what happens beginning in the second year of life, where the back, where the effect sizes go to greater than 1. So we're not talking about minor statistical differences that happen to be significant. We're talking about very large practical differences. And you will note that there is a slight uptick between 3 months, 3 years, and 4.5 years. We published a paper because that puzzled us. It turns out the most likely explanation is beginning at about age 3, back then, other preschool programs were available for some of the kids, and social services frequently made those programs available to kids in the control condition, and we have shown that there is a proportionality between the amount of time that the kids in the control group spent out of their home in other programs and the quality of those programs. So the argument that we have made frequently is that we have this program carefully described for scientific purposes. You have to have replicability, but that the program probably does not contain anything unique that could not be put into other programs, and that in fact were likely to be included in other programs that children went to later. So we frequently get people want us to say, well, there's something special about this program. What's special about it, I think, is the scientific design and the careful data collection, not that it's not something that other people can't do. Is it complicated? Yeah, well, that's why we've written the 500 and some articles that we've written. You know, when we really understand it, we'll be able to say it, you know, maybe in a 20-page paper. But this is one example. if we do multiple regression analyses and we do different ones at different age points, what we find is that the contributions of different variables change in their weight through time. Boy, does that really make some people mad who think that it's either genetics or environment. What do you mean? Well, now we know that certain genes get turned on and turned off, and it's much more complicated and all that. But when we first published this, people just didn't really gritted their teeth at us. What do you mean that the effects of maternal IQ are not constant? Well, what you see here is that if we do a regression equation at each of these occasions and months, what we find is that over time, the intervention accounts for more and more of these IQ point differences, that maternal IQ over time becomes negatively correlated, and this is the number of points you would add or subtract if you were writing out the equation, and that the home environment over time becomes more powerful. So what you have is a dynamic system changing with different factors exerting different levels of influence at different points in time, which says maybe we ought to be looking at when we can intervene and what's the magnitude of the outcome that you affect. And that's why this point that it drops from 18 to 13 here gets undergirded by the fact that some of the kids in the control group were able to go to alternative places, and so the game's not over at a particular point. We're shading the probabilities, and that, I think, makes the game intellectually much more interesting. At the end of the 8 years, we had a group of people independently assess the kids on reading and math, among other things. When we drew this graph, I just thought this was uplifting, because there's a proportionality here. The kids who are in the control group, both preschool and during the school years, are coming in at about the 10th or 11th percentile, standard score of 83. The kids who got the K2 program are doing a little better, but not that much. The kids who got the preschool only are doing better, and the kids who got the preschool and the school age program are doing the best. And again, you can see the effect sizes down here, 0.75, 1.04. So fairly substantial changes in reading and also in math, arguably the two gateway skills for subsequent performance. So this slide summarizes 200 publications or so. And on the left are things that were positively influenced, and the biggest influence turns out to be what happens in the first 5 years. That has to be qualified, because we couldn't do exactly the same thing after that, because development changes and you would do things, you can't just run it back the same way. So, but what it does say is that the effects are broad as well as deep. Enduring effects on measured intelligence, reading and math, whether you believe you have control over your fate or not, years in school, a fourfold increase in going to college. The kids who were in the treatment group, coming from below 25% of where it takes to qualify for being below poverty, coming from homes in which the mothers on average have IQs of 80, in which There is really devastating intergenerational poverty. These kids who got the pre-K program are going to college at the same rate as children in the United States in the general population. And they're graduating from at the same rate. We just and when they graduate, they're more likely to be employed full time. They're more likely to earn more money. They're more likely to have higher prestige. That bodes potentially well for the next generation. And we just published in Science. There's improved cardiometabolic health. Now, we were providing health care to both groups. So it really raises the question, one that NIH is very interested in, why is health and education so tightly linked? And what are the factors that relate that? We now know that we also have cut grade repetition, special ed placement, teen pregnancies, smoking and drug use, teen mental health, depression, adult welfare use, cut obesity rates, and the Framingham risk score, all of which suggest that these effects are broad. And we had some of these findings, and we were approached by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and asked whether we thought any of these findings had relevance for children with biological risk conditions. And they asked if we would lead that effort, and we said yes, if you will do it as an experiment. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation had never done an experiment. They had done lots of demonstration projects. They agreed, and they provided us very generously back then with $35 million to carry out something that allowed us to bring a level of science that we had never been able to engage in before. And Sharon's going to tell you about that.
So it addressed the same questions that the original Abecedarian project addressed, but now applied to children who were biologically fragile. This time we scaled up to 985, not just 111 children. They were premature and low birth weight. It was also an RCT, randomized control trial, in 8 different cities with 8 university partners. We adapted the supports because these children had a lot of health risks. We didn't want them exposed to viruses in the first year because of their respiratory systems. So we did home visiting for both mothers and children. That went on for a full 3 years. And then the center-based education, the enriched educational program, we delayed till 12 months corrected age. If you're born 2 months early, in the first couple of years, you adjust for it. So we adjusted for their degree of prematurity. And I want to remind you, prematurity in blacks, currently 17.1%. It's a very high percentage compared to 10%, 10.8 in whites, and low birth weight, almost double, 13.5 versus 7% in whites. So it's a big concern nationwide. This is showing you, again, red means they got the educational intervention. The control group, again, got nutrition, social services, and health care. They are not left untreated. This is not an untreated control, but they didn't get the extra education. And each one of these is a different place. So left is Arkansas, Little Rock, University of Arkansas, Einstein in the Bronx, Harvard, they were in Boston, Miami, Penn, Texas was in Houston, Washington, Seattle, Yale up in New Haven. In every single city, the reds, the ones who got the education, are doing significantly better here at 3 years of age. But you can see something interesting. How high they're scoring is kind of different, isn't it, in those 8 different cities? And how low the yellows are. Miami, these kids are really, really scoring low there. And all of the mothers and families had to speak enough English, so these are not recent immigrants who didn't speak English. So you can see the magnitude of difference varies across the city. The benefits exist everywhere, but how big they are does depend on the ecology and the context. What this seminar series is all about, in terms of whether you're looking at animal models or humans, or even at the level of the cell and subcellular, there are different contextual factors that influence our biological and, in this case, behavioral outcomes. So it worked we had 8 experiments. They all worked. Some were a little more successful than others, but none failed. Now, this is just to show you the pluses mean significant differences. I want to remind you, we mostly talk about the cognitive academic IQ, but we never just measured that. And whenever we measure other things, we find the benefits. And the blank spaces mean we didn't measure it because they weren't old enough or there weren't good tools for children that young. It doesn't mean we didn't find it. And NS means not significant. So the first year of life, we don't see differences. But they didn't begin going to school, if you will, the special school, until they were 12 months of age. And so you see we helped a lot of other things. Mothers were better able to solve their everyday problems. And we almost always do 2 generations, but today we're focusing on the children and not telling you about all the benefits to the moms. This is, if we don't get through everything, this is for us the most important graph we and our colleagues have ever generated. Any of you, by the way, can download these slides. You can get the articles and you can use them. But I'm going to take a minute because it's so powerful and ask you to please look only at the yellow bars and ignore the red for a minute. And from the very left, across the x-axis, we show the mom's education, some high school, but they didn't finish, to graduating high school or a GED, or some college, but they didn't graduate, to graduating at least a 4-year college. And the yellow is a nice stepwise pattern from lower to higher. The mom's education predicts her child's intelligence. We've known this for 4, 5, 6 decades. Nothing new, and it's still current. Except if you go to the subheading, will or can the circle be broken? Look at the reds. And remember on the left, 100 is national average. So for starters, all of those red bars are above 100. They're not near 100, they're above 100. They're not exactly level, but that's level enough that we could live with that. If in our nation we could have everyone, if we could start to level the field so that by 3 years their vocabulary, their IQ, their social emotional coping skills were on par, and if we could keep it there when they enter school, and when they enter school we can do what we need to do to individualize health and education, then we've got the democracy that we need to have. So this to us is just amazing. And you can see in this sample of biologically fragile children, for those of you in the back, more of the parents were in the low education category. And then there's one final point where you're now allowed to look at the red and yellow together on the far right. Well, we wasted our time and money on those the reds all the way over there. If the parents have a 4-year degree, heck, they don't need this program. Well, no. Their parents were getting them this program at home, in the community, with the doctors, with the social workers, with the finest preschool or specialist if their speech was delayed or whatever. The resources that configure and surround college graduates, most of whom are employed and earn very acceptable incomes, they can get their children what they need to turn out healthy. So by and large, premature low birth weight babies born into middle and upper middle class turn out great. Doesn't mean their parents didn't work darn hard that first decade or so of life. And have any of you had a premature low birth weight baby?
Or how many are low birth weight?
How many of you were little when you were born? See? We've got some pretty successful people here. But so to us, this is, yes, that circle can be broken. Then from that, prematurity, low birth weight, NIH and Congress have wanted to reduce prematurity and low birth weight, the huge toll it takes on families and the children. And we created a network. I was there along with 5 other major groups. And this is what we knew in 2002. Most people think if you give everyone good prenatal care, that's going to help. Prenatal care saves the lives of women, and it does not yet make babies much healthier. We've had a lot of debate. We finally got the many millions of dollars to do rigorous trials, and I was part of those prior to 2002. High-quality prenatal care is important for moms, but it doesn't give us babies who are not premature or not small. So we're not going to put all of our money in prenatal care. It's too late. We knew there were a lot of studies, retrospective, looking back to say early things in life, prenatally or in the first few years, they call it fetal programming or the Barker hypothesis, that things happen before you're born can make you more or less susceptible to adult onset illnesses. We knew that from many, many studies, but the studies all had a lot of scientific flaws or limits. Although there was a preponderance of evidence leaning in that direction, they were all quite imperfect. We had the idea that experience before conception could affect not only the parents but children, mainly from exquisite animal model studies going back to the 1960s, where if you stress a rat by changing the world, you teach a rat to go through swim a maze, and then you change the game, and what that rat learned doesn't work, and you frustrate that pregnant rat, the babies don't learn so well. Plus, she's not such a good mother. Then those little baby rats grow up, and they're not very good mothers, the ones who were female. But even if you then took those babies and instead of letting them grow up with their moms who were stressed, you put them in a really good foster home. There's a lot of cross-fostering in our good animal experiments. The grandpups don't learn as well. The learning ability 2 generations removed. This was published in 1967, that non-genomic transmission of the ability to learn transcends generations. But we didn't have good data yet in human beings. And then neighborhood and community effects above and beyond the individuals exert independent effects. So even healthy people in neighborhoods with a lot of stress and distress are harmed above and beyond their own particular healthy biology and vice versa. And we had lots of evidence about maternal stress during pregnancy, but no one had ever measured it prior to becoming pregnant. It's kind of hard to catch people before they're pregnant, you know, unless we catch everybody. So what we did do is then design a study, but because the mission behind this was to reduce health disparities, primarily for Blacks and African Americans, for the first time ever, NIH made this a community-based participatory research where citizens of the 5 cities where we did this research joined us as co-partners and helped design the research, help pick the measures, help recruit the study participants, and help them to trust the researchers that when we learn things, they will have ownership of the findings to help change their own communities. It wouldn't be the we and the they of research. I'm going to go on and tell you the theme of this project is allostatic load. It's an idea of multiple biomarkers of the cumulative wear and tear of stress. It can be acute, episodic stress, or chronically living in stress. Always being marginalized, always having people look at you like you're less smart, you're dangerous, you're not going to succeed in life, get away from me. That kind of everyday stress, whether it's intentional and institutional, or whether it's unintentional, but it's still there. What does that do to a human being, and what does it do to a family or a community? And so allostasis, is the broad biological term for regulating things, and actually a certain amount of stress in almost all systems is necessary to keep us tuned. We don't want to be totally stress-free because then we'd have no coping skills. So, but excessive stress, chronic stress, no. And stress both allostatic load and stress had been shown to predict middle age and adult onset diseases and death from the study of successful aging done by the MacArthur Foundation Network. So we adopted their same 10 biomarkers of allostatic load. We measured these in moms repeatedly. We enrolled 2,550 moms in 5 cities. We began when they delivered one baby, and they all said someday they're going to have another baby. So we got them before the next baby, and we knew they were interested in bearing children. So it's an interpregnancy interval study. And we measured all of these: blood pressure, cortisol levels from morning to night. If you have a depressed rise, that's indicative of chronic stress. We look at immune inflammatory processes and metabolic. BMI, we looked at lipid panel, waist to hip ratio, which is predictive of certain disease, and so forth. So we measure these, and we measure them prospectively and at many intervals. After you give birth to one baby, then if you get pregnant throughout that pregnancy, we measure that. And then after you give birth to the next baby, we keep on measuring it. And then at 2 of the sites, one of them here at Virginia Tech, we're continuing to follow those babies, although this sample is all in the greater Washington, D.C. area. So it was multi-site, transdisciplinary, and it's one of those big science studies that's, for those of you who love science or love numbers or love controlling things, I'm happy for you. I used to be like that. Now in this kind of research, you have to give in, cooperate, argue and hold your own, and then be a good sport and come back to the room and do it again tomorrow, because you have a lot of different opinions about what you should do and how. So you come up with the best possible set of measures and ideas, but what you have is the engagement, and in this case, respectfully, of the people whose lives have for generations been terribly harmed. This is the simplest framework. I will not discuss it with you today, but I'm the lead author, and it just got published a couple months ago, so you're welcome to read it, that describes and they just gave me the first authorship. I didn't do all the work. We give credit to the whole network as well, and then for each of our papers, we rotate who gets stuck with all the details and actually writing it. So these are not only my ideas by any means, but you can see that, and almost all studies of pregnancy outcome in children, and especially in blacks, marginalize and don't even bother to include fathers, and we did. And we got national groups of black men and fraternities and all sorts of groups engaged with us about how to recruit the dads so that they'd want to join us, trust us, and be part of it. And it's been amazingly rewarding. So this is where I can tell you some new findings as we're closing. This is second to last, I think. parent stress, and we also look at resilience. So today I haven't talked, at the very beginning I mentioned people live in poverty. Most people in poverty grow up healthy and do fine, but too many of them don't. Those coexist. Well, we look at resilience, we look at coping mechanisms, we look at spiritual beliefs, we look at personal relationships, friendship patterns, the relationship to the mom or to other people. So we look in great depth at that as well. Although to date, I wish I could tell you that those factors matter more. They probably matter, but we don't see it yet as strongly because there's something about the negativity that really takes a toll on health. And so there is a direct relationship to the allostatic load, those 10 indicators of wear and tear on the body's systems, and the amount of stress that moms and dads tell us they are experiencing. And that paper is under review at JAMA. The next one is that parent stress and resilience relate to the relationship that the mother and father have. And it's, yes, a bad relationship can be stressful, but we measured racism. And we measured it with tools that our community embraced. There's a lot of tools out there to measure racism. Many come from our field of psychology. Some of them were not acceptable to our community to use. And so we either revised them or found other ones or adapted them for some of our local communities. And the perception of racism is very important, as well as the reality of racism. External indicators of institutional racism, and they combine to exert an effect on the body. That's also under review. Mother stress and allostatic load in preconception, I think, Craig, it was 5 weeks ago that the paper was completed, and that we hadn't run the numbers until about 8 weeks ago. First time ever that what happens prior to conception correlates with what happens during the prenatal period, but above and beyond it, and we did 3 very alternative models and fancy statistics, all of them affirm that what happened pre-conception exerted an independent, significant effect on the probability of the baby being low birth weight. It's the first time ever we have prospective rather than retrospective data on that. And that paper is ready for submission. And then the fourth one has not been finalized, but we've done all of the preliminary runs to show that in neighborhoods, the resources impact the health and the pregnancy outcome. And it turns out it's mostly the person's perceptions about resources, not the reality. So you might have a library and a Y and social services, but you may not know about them, you may not use them, or you may not like them. So if you think you're in a community that supports you and people like you and your families, that matters even more than just the checklist of whether you have them. Now, presumably, many people who think they have them, they're actually there. But just being there, we did neighborhood walks, we have photographs, all sorts of ethnography techniques. Measuring the resources doesn't predict the pregnancy outcome. It's those resources combined with what people think and feel about the resources, that combination that impacts their health and the next generation. So Craig, just at the end.
When Martin Luther King talked about the dream and about achieving social equality, he really talked about it at multiple levels. He was a brilliant man. What I hope we have been able to share with you today, and we will talk a bit more about policy in the talk tomorrow, is that we have an uphill fight. We still have, every day, things that shouldn't be occurring to any of our citizens. We need to change it. We are the country that's metaphorically the shining city on the hill. We're the oldest democracy. We need to uphold our ideals, to let the rest of the world know that there is a place where people are treated equally, where through hard work and some luck you can make it, and that there is a hand up out at all times, because that's who we are. That's what Martin Luther King dreamt of. What I hope these examples suggest that that's not an unreasonable hope, and that Virginia Tech will take on the task of being an exemplary, positive influence to bring about the kinds of changes that will make the ideals of this country a reality for each and every one of our citizens. Thank you for the honor of addressing you.
Wow, that was brilliant, wasn't it? The work is just conceptually sophisticated, statistically savvy, and socially important, and they're bringing science to bear on these incredible issues, which I find terribly gratifying that we can merge science and how we approach these social processes. I think it's really good solutions and answers to some of these difficulties. I'm going to stop there, but I think the Ramey said they could take a couple of questions. I know it's 3:30, and so we'll have a couple of those. Please.
I'm struck by the fact that all of your work, as far as I'm concerned, is done in urban environments. You were showing from cities. So I wonder if there are other studies, or you consider there's a conflation of poverty and race in here. Are there other studies to address poverty on its own? As you know, where we live here, we're surrounded by communities of poverty that are...
It's a brilliant question, and it is. Most of the studies we talked about were conducted in urban settings. One of the reasons that we are here is because we think there is a unique opportunity to study an understudied segment of the population. The Appalachian population, the Blue Ridge. We know very little about development in this swath of the country compared to what we know in cities. And many of the factors may be the same. There may be some differences. I think that a comparative analysis is one that is likely to shed light both on control factors regulating development and the extent to which these issues are represented equally in different ecologies.
I'll also add that in the Community Child Health Network, we study rural poverty among blacks and whites in coastal North Carolina, and we're following those babies who are 3.5 to 5. Last weekend we were in 5 families in rural North Carolina, and Chapel Hill isn't exactly urban, and it's certainly in the 70s. It's not New York City, it's not the Bronx. And then we had other studies. We did, our largest study ever was a study of 11,700 children in 31 sites, and about 7 of those were rural sites throughout both the Deep South and the Midwest. So we've done a lot of work on poverty in rural areas, black and white as well, but we didn't talk about all of it today.
In the back.
Research is outstanding. Your information was just mind-blowing. But my question is, how will all these good data be disseminated throughout the United States of America, where school boards will take action, mental health and community health centers will take action to make change?
I wish I knew the short answer to that. I do know that we must form relationships. We must form partnerships, consortia. We must find ways to say what this means and all the other research that other people have done means in a way that will allow people to hear it. Some people don't want to hear it. Some people have their ears fully closed, and we have to figure out how to be smart enough to get them engaged in the conversation.
We need advocates. For example, the United Nations has advocates. Angelina Jolie is an advocate for the United Nations. She produced a movie called Blood and Honey about the war in the Balkans. She just finished producing a movie about a World War II veteran, Unbroken. These are the kind of people we need to advocate these types of changes for us. And they're willing, but they don't know either.
I would like to nominate you.
And let's follow
To
up.
spearhead this. You're exactly right.
I will talk with you later on after we set it.
And I'm going to publicly brag, especially this gentleman to my left. And if you looked at his calendar for the last 25 years, he has probably spoken to 12 or 13 state legislatures and given them these graphs in a simpler form. We gave you the more complicated form. He has spoken to our national superintendents, our national attorneys general, to major groups and coalitions, and for many, many years we've worked very closely with the National Governors Association, and then also back to this urban, but the urban cities have coalitions focused on a combination of early childhood and parenting supports. And we've worked very closely with the armed forces, who are desperately concerned about prematurity and low birth weight. They're concerned about domestic violence. And they had some of the worst to mediocre childcare, and they went in there with a passion, and they said, we can't have people serving our country having their kids go to inferior care. And they changed it, and if they can do it, we can do it in our community. So we've worked with them, but it's not at the level you're thinking. So thank
I'll
you.
accept that challenge.
One more question?
I would just like to apologize to all of you who are sitting in the aisles. This work is wonderful, and your interest is wonderful, and you caught us by surprise. But tomorrow, we're ready for you. So we have an auditorium that seats 70 more people. We have 2 overflow rooms that seat another 50, and we'll try to get yet more overflow rooms where the talks will be broadcast. So please don't be discouraged.
And it's
Please.
not the same talk. Tomorrow, if those of you who can't come tomorrow, we can make available. National Geographic did a special on Abecedarian. We're going to show you about 6 minutes. Well, you're going to get to meet one of those grown-up little babies that did so well, and he'll speak in his own words. And it was the first time we ever allowed someone in the research to volunteer to go public, and you can meet this amazing gentleman.
So please come tomorrow and tell your friends.
We can do this. This country can make the changes. We are 150 years away from the country coming apart, with 500,000 people dying because we were on the wrong track. We have come through the 60s and the 70s. The country is aware now at a level that it's never been that we are taxing ourselves through the 1,001 cuts that come from justice, from intolerance, we can change it. And people like us need to accept the challenge and go any place, pay any price, do what we can, because without this country being the beacon that it can be, what other country is going to step up and take on this challenge? So thank you all for coming.